Hello, everyone, and welcome to DisrupTV. My name is Bala Afshar, Chief Digital Evangelist at Salesforce, and your co-host for the next hour. We welcome you to follow us on Twitter at DisrupTV Show. Please send Ray, myself, and our distinguished guests your questions using hashtag DisrupTV. We'll do our best to answer them live. We've interviewed over 200 guests on DisrupTV, so please check out our podcast library on SoundCloud and iTunes. Also subscribe to our DisrupTV video on YouTube and Vimeo. It's my pleasure to introduce my co-host, Ray Wong. He's the founder and CEO of Constellation Research. He's a best-selling author of the book, Disrupting Digital Business, regular contributor to Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and ZDNet, and in my humble opinion, one of the top futurists to follow on Twitter at RWANG0. Welcome, Ray, to DisrupTV.
Hey, thanks a lot. I'm here with my co-host, Bala Afshar, Chief Digital Evangelist of Salesforce, but more importantly, one of the top CMO, CIO influencers in the world, an author himself, and more importantly, someone you can learn from easily. But we're not here about us. We're here about our awesome guests this week. Who do we have this week to kick it off?
Ray, we have an extraordinary roster, and we're going to start our show today with Manoj Saxena, Executive Chairman of Cognitive Scale and the first general manager of IBM Watson. Manoj is the executive chairman at Cognitive Scale and a successful serial entrepreneur who founded and sold 2 venture-backed software companies within a 5-year span. He's chairman of Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, San Antonio branch, and is founding managing director of the Entrepreneurs Fund 4, a $100 million seed fund focused extensively on cognitive computing. Most recently, Manoj was general manager of IBM Watson, where his team built the first cognitive system. We're going to love to hear about that. You can follow Manoj on Twitter at SAXENA. Welcome, Manoj, to DisrupTV.
Thank you, Bala, and thank you, Ray, for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Hey, no, we're really excited to have you here. You are more than a serial entrepreneur, more than the CEO of a company and a founder. You've done a lot of very different things. And it was interesting to watch you through this journey as we've gone from predictive analytics to machine learning to cognitive computing to AI and really go all in. Right? Some people say, I'm going to start a division, I'm going to create a new area, I'm going to go after a market, but you went all in, not just in investments, not just in starting a company. So what's happening in this AI? Are we entering a new AI summer? Are we about to enter another AI winter? Where is this really going? I mean, are people starting to get it? Are we getting traction? What's the state of AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, AI is definitely one of the longer term trends that's going to impact all aspects of our life, how we live, how we work, how we play. But it's not just AI by itself that is driving all the excitement and the energy and the investments. It's the culmination of, I call it the big 6. There's a super convergence of cloud, social, mobile, big data, AI, and blockchain that are all converging at one time and creating a new hyper-converged infrastructure on which people can create disruptive business models and disruptive business processes. And I've been in the tech industry for over 20 years now. Client server, web, mobile, cloud, and everything. I think AI, by far, with what's going on now, is an order of magnitude bigger than all of them put together. And I think we started Watson about 7 years ago. It's hard to believe. When I was asked by IBM to start the Watson program, was back in 2011. And there's a lot that's happened since there, and I think it's being driven from this whole mindset of disrupting, staying in the spirit of DisrupTV, disrupting how you look at both existing work, as well as disrupting how you can create new business processes and new business models. And again, I look at it as, particularly when you combine AI and blockchain, Cognitive Scale calls it blockchain with a brain. And when you really start building business processes on top of it, I think there's a phenomenal opportunity for invention in the enterprise and also in the consumer space.
You mentioned the consumer space, Manoj. Do you believe it's this mass personalization at scale and these indispensable experiences with in a consumer side, whether it's Amazon recommending a product or Netflix recommending a movie or Spotify recommending music? It's these great companies have invested in technology to anticipate your needs. and have done that on the consumer side. It seems like that speed, personalization, and intelligence is becoming the new currency in the digital economy. Is that what's fueling the excitement and your bold comment in terms of why companies need to really not only have AI on their radar, but actively be looking to build their companies and capabilities on top of machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, smart robotics, and all these different branches under AI?
No, right on. I think that's well said. I mean, on the consumer side, what we are looking at actually is a whole new class of experience that's coming about. I mean, there is a whole new level of engagement, whether when you're swiping on, a product recommendation engine, or you're talking to a Siri or using it for a Google Maps. AI is already sort of the foundation of consumer experiences and consumer decision making. And I think it'll become more and more so. And it's not just on the mobile phone. I think the exciting part of AI that's going to come about for consumers is multi-sensory experiences. Not just mobile, but also looking at my interaction with voice, interaction with my augmented intelligence through AR and VR. So I think AI is going to be that silver thread that's going to be all pervasive through all touch points. And it's going to drive a whole new level of consumer experiences and business models. And I think we're just at the very beginning of it. I mean, to Ray's point on the earlier question, where are we on this? I think we are hardly at the sort of the beginning of the first innings in what may be a 15 to 20 year shift in consumer experiences and business models.
Right. Ray and I spoke to Walt Mossberg. He referred to it as ambient computing.
Yep.
This notion that you're speaking to things and you're able to get insights around you, whether it's a wearable or an Echo or a dog.
Right on. I talk about the fact that we are moving to a world where the world is going to become our browser and we will be the cursor, right? And we will be the cursor. Our location is the cursor. My sentiment, my expression on the face is the cursor. My voice is going to be the cursor. So I think the notion of ambient computing is right on. So when you move to an environment where you are augmented by instrumentation around you and the world experiences and engages you, I think we're looking at a whole new class of innovation that I've never been this excited about technology since probably I saw Mosaic, the browser, back in 1996. And I think there's a whole sort of a massive amount of explosion of technology, a Cambrian sort of a technology innovation that we're going to see happen in the next 5 to 10 years.
It's one of the phrases that has been resonated the most among our clients this year was infinite ambient orchestration, right? Yeah. Things are happening. There's no beginning and end to a journey. It's ambient, as Vala was saying. It's orchestration because we're cutting across platforms and ecosystems and insights. Everything's happening around. And that's changing the shift of funding dollars from innovation to operations. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because it's not just enough to innovate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think when you look at innovation, kind of in a broad way, and I'm more of an enterprise and a consumer guy, I look at AI-driven innovation sort of broadly in two buckets. There is AI to automate and replace a job, and there is AI to augment and amplify a job. And at Cognitive Scale, we focus more on augmented intelligence. I call it putting the Iron Man Jarvis suit on every knowledge worker, right? So that every worker is your smartest worker, and every interaction is the best interaction, given all the data that you have. So when you look at it, I look at it sort of through four lenses. One lens is this augmented intelligence versus automated intelligence. So there's a lot of money going today, I believe, in the automated intelligence around robotic process automations and stuff like that. But I think the real big opportunity is in augmented intelligence, and I can give you examples later on. So that's one lens. The second lens is around the notion of driving efficiencies across existing business processes versus building new business processes and new business applications. And AI can be used on both sides. And I think someone said it very well. Incremental innovation of a candle did not give you a light bulb, right? So I think there is that aspect of you can increment.
It was a bigger candle. I mean.
So I think there is a second lens of process efficiencies and existing models versus inventing new business models. I think there is a second lens that money is going there. I think the third part is where in the stack is the money going? And today, most of the dollars are, in my opinion, being spent at the data level, at the machine learning and the data science level. But there is a whole slew of investment yet to come, which is around verticalization of this AI to drive business outcomes. There's a lot of money going in today around what I call as science projects. And if you talk to large customers, many of them are not able to take these science projects into production because there is a gap between this data science world and enterprise process and application development world. And I think the next level of funding is going to go into verticalized applications of AI where there are business outcomes and applications of AI that democratizes the skill level. According to Google, there are only 10,000 people in the world who can do the machine learning and data science, but there are, probably over 100 million programmers globally who can work it. So there is, I think, a shift that's going to come about in where the dollars are going. Right now, it's just laying the plumbing.
Sure, sure. It feels like maybe in the past, the challenge was scarcity, and today it's abundance.
Yep.
When you look at companies that are tracking AI space, like Venture Scanner has listed 2,000 startups that have fetched about $26 billion in VC funding across about 10 different categories of AI.
Yeah.
So I'm an executive coming to you, Manoj, asking for advice. I'm looking at this super infographic of thousands of companies that are trying to build intelligence and speed. Where do you start? How do you accelerate adoption of AI in the enterprise in a methodical way, but in a way that you can be agile and not wait long enough for someone to steal your lunch?
Right on. That's a brilliant question. By the way, I've probably done almost 50 of these talks over the last year, where I get invited by boards and CEOs. I was with JP Morgan last week with their topmost leadership team and 300 of the CEOs talking about what is it that AI is from a business context. And I think here are the 5 things that I tell them. Number one, understand what AI is as a business capability. AI is too important to be left to the technologists. Okay, so I think the first part I tell them is really understand what is the art of the possible with AI. The second part is then build a business case around where do you apply AI. Because one of the customers said it well to me, dots versus bubbles. I've got these lot of dots of AI projects, and they move like $1 million or $2 million, but I want a big bubble that changes how my trader does trading, right? So that's the second part, is the business case. Once you understand what the art of the possible is, find out the business case where you can implement it. Third is then start experimenting and pivoting. This is a market about all learning projects, and Cognitive Scale has this method called 10-10-10, when in 10 hours we help you select a use case, 10 days you build a reference app using your data, and in 10 weeks you go live. So the whole idea is, how do you, in 90-day sprints, start actually implementing something live? That's the third thing I tell them is, don't pray for success by 18 months, pay for success in 90 days, right? And then the fourth part is drive this as a top-down initiative, not as a bottom-up initiative. It has to be done by the leadership as a business imperative, not as a technology and a data-up imperative. And the last part I tell them is start building an ecosystem of skills, because what you're looking at the hyper-converged infrastructure, and as an industry, we have never dealt with this. All these 6 technologies. At most, we had client server to web, web to mobile. Now you have the 6 technologies coming at you at one time. No matter how big you are, you're not big enough or smart enough or rich enough to come up with all the ideas yourself, and start building an ecosystem of both skills inside and partners on the outside, folks like what Ray is doing, so you can learn from each other and start assembling these systems. So those are kind of the 5 things I lay out as, how as a CEO or a board you should be looking at AI.
Got it. Now, any hypes and misconceptions you have to diffuse in the boardroom? Because we see this a lot in our conversations. I think, boardroom education is going to be one of the biggest areas that's missing right now. But you're doing that, we're doing that. What are you telling boards, not to have misconceptions about, so that we don't have this massive AI hype, or we don't also have this massive misconception of what business models can be supported by AI?
Spot on. That's a great question. And also, I talk about this notion of pragmatic AI. AI is so overhyped today, so I actually make a joke out of it, and I say AI today stands for artificially inflated, and AI today also stands for amazing innovations, right? It's both that's going on. So some of the big hypes and the misperceptions of AI that I see are the following. Number one, that AI is going to take my job away, okay? And I think while it will, there are about 18 million jobs that AI will take away by 2020. But there are 1.3 billion workers whose life I think AI is going to transform and make it better. That's why I focus more on augmentation rather than automation with AI. So that's the number one, is it's going to actually create what Ginny Rometty, my mentor at IBM, she calls it as new collar jobs, not blue collar or white collar. So I think the first part, misperception, is AI as a job killer. Yes, every big technology does that, but there's a lot more, I think, of enhancements that it'll do. Number two is AI is going to kill me. Okay, this is the whole Terminator kind of a nonsense, and this is where you talk about, AI is so basic today. At best, you're replicating the functions of a brain, not a mind or not a consciousness. And this whole perception that Hollywood has put about, you got to dispel that. Then third is AI is seen as natural language processing. And some of it I owe to some of the probably poor marketing that we did with Watson, where they see it as a Jeopardy question answer machine. NLP is just one way of answering, some problems. Or today, one of the big myths is AI equals deep learning. It couldn't be farther from the truth. These are all subsystems that make up a car, right? NLP, deep learning, all of these are piece parts. Or AI equals analytics. So AI, to me, at the very core, the way I explain to them is, the amazing innovations happen when you focus on business outcomes and business processes and business models. No different than what we have done with the web, with mobile and others. So I think it's kind of dispelling those notions and then saying, implement it in 90-day projects, get some value, nail it, and then scale it type of a value prop is what I give them.
That's terrific advice. Manoj, advice to our audience watching and business leaders. Where do you get your where do you go to research leading advancements and innovation in AI, and who are some of your mentors? Where should we be going to gain just a fraction of the knowledge you have in terms of impact of AI and the future of work and everything that you've mentioned so far?
Well, it's a great question. Back in the early days when I started my career, my manager at 3M, the Post-it company, he said something to me that I've always remembered. He said, an office desk is a dangerous place to view the world from. So do not view the world from behind an office desk. So what I would suggest is, there are probably 4 or 5 ways in to kind of get immersed in this. The easy way is, again, I'm not trying to pay to the audience here. Ray's got a massive following, things like DisrupTV. There's a lot of stuff on social media where you can start learning and appreciating the artificial intelligence in terms of both the hype as well as the practicality. So one is that, the education part. Second part, I think, is going and attending these meetups and or conferences. I think those are another great way to start really looking at it. Third is, if you're in a large company, bring in vendors. I mean, get in people like Salesforce or Cognitive Scale and others and say, hey, tell me about where have you applied it? Walk me through, unpeel this onion and tell me what's possible. The fourth thing is essentially start experimenting with it. There's so many tools out there. And if you look at the rate and pace, I don't know if you guys saw what Amazon announced yesterday with SageMaker or earlier in the week. The rate and pace at which Amazon, Salesforce, Microsoft, IBM are open sourcing these tools is massive. So create a sandbox and start playing with it. Because I think there's no better way to learn around it than just getting your hands on it. And last but not the least, I think it's just sitting back and listening to your customers, really understanding what their problems are. Because at the end of the day, AI is nothing but a very powerful tool to solve a customer and a business problems. And I think it's a combination of things is what I would do to really get a better perspective on this.
Hey, we're getting some direct messages from Twitter. I would be missing a huge opportunity if I didn't ask you about 28 days, 6,000 kilometers through Cape Town, Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe. What is all that about? And talk a little bit about Formula One in Austin.
Oh, Formula One to me is like a religious experience. It's like the world's.
We should have talked about that the last 20 minutes. I love that stuff.
Now, racing is interesting. I think all of us have this. We're all type A personalities. Racing is what I need to slow my brain down. Racing to me is sort of like a meditation in motion, right? Because when you're driving, if you don't focus on that, bad things happen. So it forces you to get in the zone and meditate. And like I said, one of my vices, if you may, is long distance endurance racing in old cars. So I did Singapore to Burma 2 years ago. I did Madrid to Marrakesh. I'm doing Peking to Paris next year. So I take about a month off every year and I run a car somewhere in the world. And I just finished 28 days through Africa South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, in an 84-year-old car, where you basically are one with the machine. And again, to me, it's a way to clarify my head and my thinking and connect with something very basic that has no electronics in it. It's wood.
It's all mechanical.
There was no AI.
No GPS. No GPS.
And no GPS. By the way, no GPS too. So they give you a notebook. You have to read from a notebook as to how to navigate. So it's very primal. No AI in there.
No AI. That's amazing.
So now, a question for you though, related to that. Have you done the gumball? Are you a gumballer as well, or is that something you want to do?
I have done my own version of it, where I have crossed the U.S. twice in 19 days, from Austin to San Diego to DC and back. We covered like about 9,000 kilometers in 19 days. So wow. Only got one.
Right. Well, hey, last question here. We're here with Manoj Saxena, as everybody knows, Executive Chairman of Cognitive Scale, first GM of IBM Watson. Last question, Austin startup scene, better than ever? Needs improvement, or what else will kick it off to the next side?
So great question. It's something I'm very passionate about. I think Austin's definitely better than ever, particularly when you look at this AI-driven innovation. It requires not just technology. It requires creative skills. It requires design. It requires understanding of media. And Austin, we've always had a combination of those things. And if you look at the quality of startups, some of my own startups that are growing nicely here, and then when you have University of Texas right here with a lot of students coming out of it, and a good amount of VC infrastructure and good law firms. So I think we do have something very special here going on in Austin that will allow, again, for innovation around human-machine interface, because it requires a combination of technologies and skills. And I'm clearly very bullish. That's why I'm based here in Austin.
Wow. We are here with Manoj Saxena, Executive Chairman and Cognitive Scale and first GM of IBM Watson. You can follow him on Twitter at Manoj, M-A-N-O-J, Saxena, S-A-X-E-N-A. And of course, you can catch him on a car somewhere. Thanks a lot for being on the show.
Thank you so much. Wow. We could have talked to Manoj for another 2 hours. Terrific. Terrific. And I love the fact, I can't believe we left it to the last minute to talk about cars and racing. I
was trying to hold off because it could have been the whole show.
Exactly.
But now we're going to jump into someone that's equally exciting as well. Someone who's been looking at some of these big trends, what that space is, what's important. And let's see if we can bring on Jay here. Let's see.
I'm looking for.
No, I think what we have is, we've got some fun with Google Hangouts.
I was, as I mentioned before the show, I was in Canada for this week, and the topic of AI, I met with about a half a dozen CEOs, and all of them wanted to speak to us about, the impact of AI in their business and their roadmap. So it's definitely top of mind. And as Manoj mentioned, it's you can't just leave it to the technologists. It's a boardroom discussion at this point. And so I'm hopeful to. I'm looking at the icon at the bottom of our screen, waiting for Jay to join us.
I think we're having a problem. Jay, if you can hear us, log back in, come in and come back out. I think we should be able to bring you back on. While he's doing that, we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing with what's going on with DisrupTV coming into the next year. We got some exciting things that we want to do. We're going to combine them with some of our events. And for those of you guys that are listening out there, you might have noticed that we've been doing these Constellation Present events with DisrupTV. And part of that is really going around the country talking about this big topic around AI. There's going to be other topics where we'll be doing breakfasts. They're going to be in a bunch of cities. And I think that's the important part, is that you're going to see this all across the board. So we're going to definitely do one in Boston again. We'll be doing we'll be back in Chicago, back in Atlanta, back in New York, in the New Jersey area. We may do one in Raleigh, Durham, and of course, somewhere in Ohio. So that's kind of a quick programming note of where we're going. And with that, who do we have on next, Bala? What's going on?
We're going to continue the conversation in terms of impact of emerging technologies. We have Jay Jacobs, Vice President and Head of Research at Global X Funds. Jay's Head of Research at an organization that has over $7 billion of assets under management. Prior to Global X, Jay was business analyst in New York Stock Exchange, Euronext, and prior to that, data analyst at AK Capital. He's a great follow on Twitter at JayJacobsCFA. And you can also follow Global X Fund at Global X Funds with an S at the end. Welcome, Jay, to Disrupt TV.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Hey, welcome.
So
Welcome to this, welcome and happy holidays. So, hey, I want to ask you a couple questions, and I think what's really important is I want to start by saying, how'd you get started in the space? Because the way you put your investment theses, the way you look at funds, the way you look at those trends, I mean, you've basically created a whole bunch of categories around these in your MLP. That's kind of very interesting. So what got you started? And I think that's something people would love to know.
Yeah, so I think it's actually kind of interesting. I was graduating college, and I was kind of faced with this decision of, do I go into the tech scene in the Bay Area where I'm from, or do I go into New York and go to finance? And most people these days are choosing sunnier California with free food at work and cool headquarters. I chose the cold New York route, going into finance. But what's been incredibly exciting is I work in the ETF space, exchange traded funds, and it's been probably the most disruptive technology that's happened to the finance space in the last century. And I don't say that with any exaggeration, because ETFs are now over $3 trillion in assets in the U.S. There's over 2,000 ETFs out there, and it's really a technology about democratization. What it's been doing is bringing any ordinary investor the ability to invest in asset class like U.S. stocks, in international countries, and commodities. And what we're working on at Global X is investing in themes. So really looking at disruptive technologies and finding a way to build ETFs that pinpoint specific disruptive themes so that investors can potentially benefit from their emergence.
As head of research, Jay, what do you look for? What are some of the signals for your trends? How do you know a technology has the disruptive impact that our prior guest Manoj was mentioning, in terms of being a boardroom discussion and not something you leave to the technologist alone?
So when we look at themes, there's really kind of three things that we need to consider. And this is a little bit more unique to the ETF structure, but one, we look for a lot of conviction in the theme. So do we believe that this is going to happen over the next few decades? It's not worth all the work to try to build an ETF around it and launch the product if you don't think the theme is going to play out the way you expect it to. So we do a ton of research, looking at major consulting firms, looking at major banks, technologists, futurists, everyone, to see what are they talking about, what is starting to really gain a lot of traction, and what's kind of at the beginning of the adoption curve. Because the second thing we have to look at is it investable? So there's a lot of themes that are out there that are interesting, but you can only invest in public equities. So they have to trade on a stock exchange in order to be in an ETF. So you miss out on the whole world of kind of venture capital, private equity kind of companies that are much smaller or not ready to be on the stock market. And the third thing we look at is time horizon. So, for an investor, really, we don't want to make this a quick trade where someone's buying into a theme and selling it tomorrow. We want to see what's a trend that's going to evolve over the next couple of decades. So that's how we end up with things like robotics and AI. This is a theme that we have a ton of conviction in. We're hearing about it from Manoj, but we're hearing about it constantly. We really believe it's kind of a one-directional trade, meaning AI and robotics is only going to get better. I can't promise you the time that it's going to, that robotics are going to be completely ubiquitous or AI is going to take over the world, but we do believe it's going to happen incrementally over time. And it's investable. There's companies out there that you can invest on the stock market that have access to these themes.
That's great. You talk about some of these exponential technologies and the investment theses and the themes. Let's go through some of them. Let's take a few of them that you think are pretty interesting as we go across that maturity model. And it's interesting the way you do these themes, because some of them are societal, some of them are economic, some of them are technology. And I think it'd be interesting to understand how you came up with them.
Sure. So I think an interesting story is our lithium and battery technology ETF. So we actually launched this back in 2010, and I will fully admit, I think we were too early with this theme, because we thought that lithium was going to start taking off because of cell phones. That if you looked across kind of the smartphone landscape, we knew that smartphones were going to take off, everyone was going to own them. but there weren't a lot of cell phone makers you could invest in publicly, and it wasn't really clear who was going to be, the main beneficiary of smartphone adoption. What we did know, however, was that all of these phones are going to require batteries, and those batteries were primarily going to run off of lithium ion. So what we did is we created an ETF that has access to lithium mining companies and battery producers. So this was back in 2010. For finance geeks on the show, in 2011 was the end of the commodity supercycle. Chinese growth started to slow down. China's really the biggest consumer of commodities these days, and all commodities started to sell off rapidly. And lithium was kind of lumped into that. So even though you had, a trend of smartphone adoption happening very quickly, it wasn't enough to overcome, massive, amounts of slowing growth in the general commodity space.
But there's a happy ending to this story, right?
There's a happy ending, which is 2017. And it comes down to electric vehicles. So that is the next big consumer of lithium. And to give you a sense of the scale, an electric vehicle like a Tesla uses about 10,000 times more lithium than a smartphone. So if you do some back of the napkin math, there's about 10 billion cell phones in the world. And if you assume a car has 10,000 times more lithium than smartphones, it only takes about 1 million electric vehicles to use all of the lithium that's been used in the history of smartphones. That's actually a very achievable number. About half of that was reached with the Tesla Model 3. So we know that million car numbers is very accessible and reachable, and we're actually pretty close to passing it. The real question is, when do we get to 10 million, 50 million, 80 million cars out that are electric? That is going to massively change the equation for lithium as a commodity, which right now is really used in portable electronics, but actually the majority of its use right now is in industrial applications like in glass and ceramics. That whole equation is going to flip. When electric cars take off, that's going to be the primary consumer of lithium.
Right. We're looking at something like 400 million metric tons of lithium in supply by 2030 in our projections. And that's something to think about. So, wow, some huge numbers.
Jay, you wrote this month. You wrote an article, "Meet the Sector Disruptors," and you shared the old paradigm and the new paradigm by different sectors. For example, consumer discretionary disruptor was millennials. You just mentioned energy sector and lithium battery technology, financials with fintech. We talked about industrials and robotics and AI as the disruptor, telecommunications, social media. Expand on this article. What are the? I mean, we've talked about robotics and AI and lithium battery disruptors that you're keenly watching.
Sure. So the concept behind this is in investing. People are very cognizant of what sectors they're invested in, and sectors are useful, but they're not always useful. Meaning they're kind of a construct in a way. So there's a committee called the Global Industry Classification Standard. They decide what the sectors are and which companies fit into which sectors. So like you said, you have consumer discretionary, which is essentially what do people spend money on when they have money. There's consumer staples. Where do people spend money regardless of whether they have money or not? Utilities, industrials, technology, etc. And what we're realizing is right now there's a technology sector, but everything is going to turn in technology in the future, right? Like if you look at consumer discretionary, you already have companies in there that are, building technology or are built off the platform of technology. You look at something like energy and it's switching over to lithium, but that's increasingly going to be driven by technology in terms of how this is being mined. Could it be mined by robots? Could AI help in the influence decision making and where to mine and how to figure out the logistics of that whole process? So when we kind of came across that concept of maybe everything's got to be technology, we started to realize that within these sectors, there's real themes that are happening within them that's really starting to disrupt them. So, you mentioned one, fintech. So financials is a pretty, in some ways, it can be a very kind of old school sector. A lot of stuff is still relationship based. A lot of stuff is funneled through major banks. There's a lot of technology in the sector as well, but it hasn't fully permeated the way it can. And you're starting to see a lot of companies come into the fintech sector and completely flip it on its head. People cutting out banks in lending, people cutting out banks in processing of transactions, people cutting out financial advisors in investments and using robo-advisors. So there's a lot of major themes that are happening within finance, and so the idea is to kind of capture those major trends, exclude the old banks, that's old school, buy the stuff that's kind of new school that's changing the sector.
Makes a lot
Wow.
of sense.
No, this is some huge stuff. So when we start thinking about, and let's take another area like IoT, right? Who's leading the charge? What business models will win out? How do they get picked in your, ETFs? I mean, like, why were those? What was the basis behind some of those companies that are driving that on the IoT side?
And there seems to be a lot of interest in terms of, or promise in terms of IoT helping companies identify new business model innovation opportunities. So I'd like to hear about that as well.
Yeah.
So what's unique about an ETF is that we are not actively managing these companies. We actually have an index that we're tracking, and that is ultimately what decides what comes in and out of the index. What we do a lot of is writing the rules for what goes into that index, so describing the kinds of companies that should qualify. So when we looked at the Internet of Things and we wanted to create a product around that, we realized that we didn't just want to own the things themselves that will be connected to the internet, but the entire ecosystem of the Internet of Things.
So the trading network, the data pipelines, what's happening with some of the technologies, the payment pieces that happen, right? You looked at the whole thing. This is a pretty broad ETF. So.
Right, that's exactly right. So we're looking at the makers of chips that are making things Wi-Fi or internet enabled. We're looking at people that make the sensors that are going to be put on things that turn them into smarter devices. We look at the network service providers. So again, that's kind of the piping. That's what's connecting things to the internet, and it's a crucial part of the Internet of Things. And then we ultimately look at kind of the downstream producers. So who's creating the wearables? Who's creating the smart dishwashers and smart trash cans and autonomous vehicles and everything that's ultimately kind of getting smarter and smarter. But the key is to own the entire ecosystem, because the reality is it is very early, and there's going to be winners and losers. We're not actually trying to pick the winners and losers. We're just saying the Internet of Things is going to happen, and we're going to participate in it, and we're going to try to really capture all the companies that are in the space.
Let's get back to the AI discussion we had at the beginning. You wrote about some leading companies in development of robotics and AI. Can you share certain characteristics and capabilities within the AI umbrella that you're looking at as part of your ETF?
Yeah, sure. So we actually bucket it into four different things. The first one is industrial automation. So a lot of these are companies that have been around since the 70s. These are industrial automation conglomerates. A lot of them are from Japan. Think of Mitsubishi Electric, Fanuc. They've been helping Michigan for years in automating car production. But what's starting to happen is that the expenses of robotics are starting to come down significantly. The capabilities of robots are also increasing exponentially because of better materials, artificial intelligence, better data collection, et cetera. So some of these relatively old companies are suddenly getting pretty interesting again because they're in the right place at the right time.
Yep.
The second bucket we look at, and we need a better name for it, we call it other robotics. That's basically surgical robotics. So a lot of robotics being used in surgery these days because robots can do a lot more than a human's hands can. It includes consumer robotics, so even vacuum cleaners and mops that clean your apartment when you're at work. Those are included in there as well. The third bucket we look at is drones and autonomous vehicles, fairly self-explanatory. And the fourth bucket we call artificial intelligence, and that's really looking at companies that are building the software or hardware that is really kind of foundational for artificial intelligence. So think of NVIDIA building GPUs. That's really kind of the most popular chip being used for AI these days.
We got a couple of folks DMing us about your bots fund. They're big fans. Not sure exactly what was going on, but they love it. So it's very, very interesting. Question for you too. As a set of questions really about what drives your thought process? Like, how do you find these places to look for the trends? Is it coming from mentors? Is it coming from your investors? Is there a set of things that you're reading that people should be looking at as just kind of these earlier demand signals?
Yeah, so it's taking in a lot of inputs. A lot of it does come from investors. So, before we even had this thematic suite, which we really started launching just a couple of years ago, we were hearing from clients and investors that they were kind of sick of the same old ETFs in a sense that, a lot of stuff had been done, a lot of what we call plain vanilla ETFs that, provide exposure.
Stocks that begin with the letter of A in this geography?
Yeah, is a little bit. But people want something that's more tangible. Finance can actually be a painfully intangible space sometimes. And, these ideas like lithium and electric vehicles or robotics and artificial intelligence or fintech, people intuitively understand this because they're interacting with it in their daily lives and they're reading about it. So, hearing that feedback from our clients really kind of gave us a light bulb went off where we realized, really there's interest in these kinds of funds. When we source the ideas, specifically for which themes to look at, we try to create a very wide aperture. We want to take in every single idea we can and then vet it through our process. So we were actually doing this a few weeks and months ago. We literally mapped every theme we have ever heard of and come across, and started to make sense of what are the commonalities, what are the differences, and then we put it through our filter again of, is this investable? Do we have high conviction in it? What are people saying? And you start to narrow it down. And the reality is it sounds like a lot, but you end up with, if you do it right, you actually don't have that many because, there's a lot of interesting themes out there, but, when you really take a critical look to it, not everything's going to make it.
No, not at all. This is wonderful. We've been taking a look at disruptive technologies, thematic investing, the future, and applying them to ETFs here with Jay Jacobs, Vice President Head Research at Global X Funds. Thanks a lot for giving us that insight. You can follow Jay and Global X Funds at JJacobsCFA and at Global X Funds. We've definitely have a lot of fans based on the Twitter feeds that are coming through here. And hey, thanks a lot for being on the show. Happy holidays.
Thank you both. This was great.
Yeah, and absolutely read Jay's articles. Very insightful, give you a sense of, when we talk about fourth industrial revolution with World Economic Forum and all these emerging technologies, you get a great sense of, why the impact shifting from old paradigm to new paradigm when you read Jay's articles. And definitely follow him on Twitter. So again, our first two guests really giving us insight in terms of, business leaders need to really think about, and in many instances, really not just on the radar, but have the right culture, process, and talent to be able to tackle some of these new emerging technologies and figure out how they can best use them to create a competitive advantage. And now, for the final part of our show, where we'll bring our first ballot Hall of Fame to DisrupTV, repeat thought leader, we have Heather Clancy, editorial director for Green Biz. Green Biz advances opportunities at the intersection of business, technology, and sustainability. They have their websites, events, peer-to-peer networking, and research. So Green Biz promotes the potential to drive transformation and accelerate progress within companies, industries, and in the very nature of business. Heather's an award-winning business journalist specializing in coverage of transformation technologies and in translating tech speak, which we heard a lot of in the first two guests, into business benefits. Her articles have appeared all over the place: Entrepreneur, Fortune, Herald Tribune, New York Times, and other must follow on Twitter. We only invite must follow on Twitter speakers on DisrupTV. Green Tech Lady, GREENTECHLADY. Welcome back, Heather.
Hi.
Hey,
Can you see that I'm blushing? Thank you. Hello.
Heather, we are so excited to have you on the show. Actually, the funniest tweet of the week came from you.
I do not pay them to do this, by the way. They just keep inviting me back. Thank you.
No, this is the funniest. You made me smile. This is the funniest tweet of the week. Oh, the irony. China's first all-electric zero-emissions cargo ship is going to be used to transport coal. Love it.
I know. Right. I mean, it's my life right now. It's like I'm a journalist, I'm a woman, I'm an environmentalist, and like I just live in constant turmoil right now.
Sure. Your thoughts on our first two guests, because typically when we start with you, you have comments and observations based on the first two guests.
Right. Oh, wow. Well, so the AI, I follow AI closely, very specific to sustainability, right? To the world of energy efficiency. There's so many tasks that corporate sustainability professionals are trying to solve that are very data intensive. Like greenhouse gas emissions. Like, how do you figure out exactly what you're creating and reducing, and water conservation? You know, what's the intensity in your manufacturing plant in Boise? You know, I mean, and so many of them are big data intensive, and they're just problems that really are hard to deal with as a human, right? So we at GreenBiz look at artificial intelligence as one of those great, I love the term that was used, augmenters, right? It's not about automation, it's about augmentation. I love that, because for me, that's what it's about. It's how do you use this technology to free the humans up to be able to think more strategically and creatively about how to solve a problem. So AI, that for me, that one word was like, oh yeah. And then the energy storage conversation just now, I just wrote a piece for our State of Green Business Report that we put up every January at GreenBiz. It's 10 trends to look forward to. And I'm not going to tell you what they are, because that would be stealing our thunder. However, the piece I was working on had to do with energy storage. And I read a stat where the lithium used for batteries for electric vehicles and stationary applications, because he didn't really get into that at all, but is going to outpace the demand for consumer electronics devices next year. Could happen next year, the lithium. So that for me was like another data point that really stuck out. But I do want to say that it isn't just electric vehicles. It is those stationary applications. There's like more than 1,700 projects going on with corporate microgrids or energy storage projects that are backing up solar and wind. I mean, you just saw that the big Tesla installation went live, or it's not live yet, but the installation is complete in Australia. I think it's 100 megawatts of energy storage, by far the largest project. I think the biggest. I think the biggest one before that was like 30. Right. The biggest one in Southern California before that was 30 megawatts. But being able to back up all that renewable capacity is a big issue, and it's both in front of the meter, like so at the solar farm level with utilities, but also behind the meter. So a lot of companies are looking at how do they put this on site. Is it fuel cell like a Bloom? Or is it a big battery that they can put in place to use to better control their energy demand, and also not be vulnerable in a blackout? So you asked, I told you, those are the things that jumped out from the previous conversation. So
you can summarize the previous guest better than Ray and I combined. So
no, I just love sitting here because I always learn something, and I could be doing email while I'm waiting, but I do really I really love the guests you get. They're so incredibly. I almost always come out with a story idea, so thank you.
Oh no,
thank you.
That's what we're here for. And one of the things that you wrote about was we captured the minds of everybody, and it goes back to Tesla, which is the Tesla Semi, right? I mean, JB Hunt, FedEx, Walmart, everyone's been placing orders for the Semi, right? They all want in on this thing. What is the attraction to it? Why are people really looking at this, right? I mean, is it really going to change transport and supply chain?
Well, so for me, this is one of those things that's been 10 years in coming, right? Because it isn't necessarily this particular vehicle, although it kind of is. But if you listen to DHL and UPS, both of them are talking a lot about their fleets, right? Because they have to. What are their trucks looking like in the future? Is it, in cities, it's some of cases, it's bicycles and little vans like that are tiny, that are taking things that last block. DHL has made incredible investments in electric vehicles. In fact, I don't know if you remember, but they bought an EV manufacturing company and are making electric vehicles. And the interest has been so high that they've got other companies that want them to make them for them. And these are vans, like they're the kind of, they're not huge, but they're like the like the van level, the Ford sort of Econo line type size, right? So they're smaller. But the point being that many of the large retailers, Walmart, you mentioned before, these companies that have to deliver, they're all looking at ways of making their fleets far more efficient. And Tesla it isn't, there's a lot of great innovation going on here. But Tesla's just kind of like upped everyone's attention, and the battery capacity is pretty amazing. I think it was like 500 miles on one charge. That's just astonishing. And again, another point to like the battery, the lithium stuff. Now we have to start looking about at the minute whether the materials will be there, right? Cobalt shortages and so forth. But for me, the big, that was the big aha. And I've been reading about these different form factors for 10 years at least, right? But this is it's one of those like, boom, wake up everyone. And now I think it's gonna help a lot of the innovators. You've got, it's also inspiring that the sector, there's a lot of orders being placed for electric buses too, right? So that's another big vehicle. So it's not just the cars, it's these other vehicles. And I'm watching those very closely. So that, I'm actually sitting here. One thing I have to finish after I'm off with you is writing about this particular development. So
I think Walmart ordered
that's
other trucks, and for Manoj and I, of course, I'm speaking on behalf of Manoj, but for me, the Roadster 0 to 60 in 1.9 seconds, that was pretty awesome. So
there's a lot of, by the way, there's a lot of focus not just on the battery ones, but the fuel cell ones, hydrogen fuel cells. So
right.
because that takes the charging problem out of the equation, right? It's not even just necessarily how much can you charge, it's how fast. So right. That's another technology that I'm watching closely.
Absolutely. You also talked about the blueprint of new green building, green building blueprints. You highlighted 3 companies in an article. Can you talk to us about commonalities in approach and best practice and trends you see in terms of what's behind a green building blueprint?
Yeah, so I know I get to jump all over the place, right? But for me, right, what's happening right now with green buildings, and I'll define what I mean by that. It's not just well, I mean, it's a lot of it is to do with energy efficiency and so forth. But what the commonality of the 3 companies I wrote about is, like, those are odd to see in a headline together. But what they do have in common is that they're making this mission to make buildings, their workplaces, more energy efficient, more at the same time make them more pleasant for the human occupants. So, these. What do you hear? What is the biggest complaint in your office? I mean, like I work at home. You two do follow, but in a workplace, people complain about the heat. They complain about lights. They complain about. I mean, that's the stuff they complain about the most. And the way that you are in your, I have this wonderful. I had to close my shade because I have this wonderful sunny office. But the things that you do with heat, with the air quality within an office building, are conducive to how people behave and act and how productive they are. So these 3 companies, what they have in common is that they're looking at this holistically. It's not part of their sustainability team over there. It's not the guy in charge of energy efficiency off on the side in a little, in his little corner or her corner. It's their way that they're making these fundamental to the entire real estate strategy of their companies. For Salesforce, as an example, and you know this probably better than I do, but it's a question. There's sort of this flow chart. Where is it? What's the power? What's the power available to us on the grid? Can we buy the power in a different way? Should we put it in? Should we take that building? Should we renew that lease? Can we get a better space that meets our sort of ethos as far as sustainability goes in a better way? So, and JP Morgan is spending a boatload of money on, metering things in their buildings. So, for example, if you turn the air conditioning on at a branch at 7:30 a.m., so it's ready for the people when they come in, or is it 7:45? And when do you turn it off? And can you turn it off overnight? Can you automate it? Can you do things to it that don't have to be the concern of the office manager there in that particular branch? Can you augment those decisions?
And whether you're leasing a building or owning a building, this mindset and culture, sustainability is benefiting other tenants as well. So,
yes, and that's a good point, because a lot of organizations or companies will say, we can't really do that. We don't own the building, but you do have a lot more influence than you, especially if you're an anchor tenant or you have a good, the way that you go to a real estate developer and work on things these days, I think is important. And it's possible. NRG in southern New Jersey, in Princeton, they do not own the building that they did all these great solar, they have this great solar installation. They have a green roof. They have native plants in the parking lot. They have all of these really interesting proofs of concept. Now, mind you, they're an energy company, but they didn't own that building, and they do not own that building, but they convinced the property manager that this was a good investment. So it doesn't have to, you don't have to own the building in order to do this.
Another post, which was fascinating, something I didn't, to be honest with you, didn't know much about until I read your post in terms of district heating. And you talked about Seattle's vision of becoming a carbon neutral by 2050, and over time, saving companies like Amazon equivalent more than 80 million kilowatts of hours of electricity over the next 25 years. And the article was titled "The Ultra Efficient Hidden Heat Source for Amazon's New Headquarters." Can you talk about this? It's just a topic that I really didn't know much about until I read your post.
I didn't even know about it. I can't even, because they've been working on this for like a year and a half, 2 years. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know why I didn't notice this earlier. But actually there's I haven't read it yet, but there's also a new standard forming, you've heard of PUE at a data center. Well, there's another standard they're developing to see how they can reuse the heat, but that's an aside. Bottom line with this particular installation is that if you look at the different ways to heat a building, it's thermal, right? So you don't have to, and this is a problem that a lot of cities and big organizations are going to need to think about and solve. Renewable energy isn't just about renewable electricity. It's about how you take the loads that are not using electricity, like the ones that are based on coal, like heating or boilers in an industrial facility. How do you change them over to sources that are greener, or less carbon intensive than the existing source? It's harder. This is a harder problem.
Recycling thermal energy.
But what Amazon did is they looked at this district, right, that they were trying to go in and help develop, and they noticed that there was this building across the street that had a gazillion servers in it, and boy, that's a heat source. So they basically developed a way to pipe that hot air over to their building and create a way of at least providing the boilers and the heating for their headquarters. And there are days in which it's too cold to use it all. Like they need supplement. They have some boilers to supplement it. But it was just a way of looking at what was available, and it reminds you of the need to sort of look at who's around you, right? So especially in an urban environment, in your neighborhood, are there partners in some of these things that you could be talking to that you haven't been talking to before? Your neighbor could be an ally. But it helped the company that was running the data centers, and it helped Amazon. So they did have to work on the technology. They had to go to the building code people and figure stuff out. And it wasn't, this, mind you, was not an easy project, but it's something that people have been doing in Europe for a while, and it's more common than you realize.
I hope the people that are in the process of making a decision about the next headquarters for Amazon recognize that Boston is already thinking about recycling thermal energy.
Right. You got it. There's a district in Cambridge. No, seriously, there is a district in Cambridge, right? Yeah. That was one of the examples I cited. Yeah.
That's right. Copenhagen and Boston. That's right.
Yeah.
We are down to the two choices for Amazon's new headquarters: Boston and Copenhagen, according to Val Afshar and Heather Clancy.
Copenhagen is yeah, right. But again, it's just another example of creative thinking.
Absolutely.
And the thermal challenge is a big deal.
For sure. Well, we're going to have you back as our last DisrupTV for 2017, talking about major trends for the year and predictions and projections of what we think are going to be top of mind trends for 2018. So I'm sure we'll talk about more interesting technology and innovation, which frankly I didn't know about until I read your post. So it was great having you on today, and Please follow Heather Clancy on Twitter at Green Tech Lady, and join us for our last episode of the year to learn even more in terms of what should be on your radar in terms of your sustainability initiatives. So thank you very much, Heather, for being on the show.
Thanks
you guys.
A lot, Heather. Have a great one. Take care.
You as well. You as well.
Wow.
Ray. I know. I mean, from Jay and Manoj, and see, one thing I wish folks could hear us before the show, because we have also some fascinating discussions before we go live, about 15 minutes before. I don't know. We should have like a VIP for some of our folks that are committed and loyal fans of DisrupTV to listen to the pre-show. We have fascinating conversations then as well.
No, this is wonderful. And hey, we are at our end of the year. We have one last show. This is our we have two last shows. We've got recap shows coming, right? We've got a great show on next week as well, episode 87. We're going to end the year on 88. But Vala, you're right. We've passed 200 guests. We've got a lot of things coming up for the next year. And I guess we'll save that for the last show to kind of share about. But who do we have next for December 8th?
Yeah, our next show, Ray and I.
Some humble folks are showing up, I believe.
Yeah, Ray and I were thinking about who should we invent. And we thought about maybe the inventor of the internet might be a good start, or specifically.
Oh, no, it's not Al Gore. It's the real inventor.
Yeah, no, we're talking protocol, the real internet. So we're honored to have Vince Cerf, Vice President, Chief Internet Evangelist at Google, and also the inventor of TCP/IP. So some consider Mr. Cerf as godfather of internet. So it's going to be a fascinating show. We have David Bray. He was a former CIO of the FCC, and he's now.
We won't be talking about net neutrality, so that will not be on the show.
But we are going to talk about People-Centered Internet Coalition, and he's also visiting executive residence for Harvard University. Most of you know David Bray. He's an extraordinary CIO and thought leader, and now he's focused on the People-Centered Internet. And last but not least, Mei Ling Feng, co-founder of the People-Centered Internet and the godmother of CRM.
Yes, one of the early pioneers of CRM back in the day.
So inventor of Internet, one of the pioneers of CRM, and one of the most extraordinary CIOs, and now executive director at the People-Centered Internet. So it's going to be just a spectacular show. Get your popcorn ready. It's going to be an amazing show. And then we'll talk about the last show. We are inviting some of the top media influencers to discuss with Ray and I predictions and trends, recapping 2017 and then looking ahead 2018. It's going to be an extraordinary end to our show. And at that point, we'll have clearly well over 200 guests. And we'll talk a little bit more about what you can expect from DisrupTV next year. So if it's Friday, it's DisrupTV. Ray, closing remarks?
No, not at all, man. Happy holidays, everyone. Stay safe. It's going to be a wonderful holiday season. We'll catch you for the last two episodes.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.